Hello everyone and welcome to today's Cambridge University Press ELT webinar. I'm very pleased to welcome Gary Anderson as today's presenter. Gary was Pedagogical Director of the Language Programme of the former American Centre in Paris, where he taught and coordinated classes for all ages of learners. He was President-elect of TESOL France when he joined Cambridge University Press as International Teacher Trainer. He's since given talks in over 60 countries on 5 continents, as well as several webinars for Cambridge English. Over to you, Gary.
Okay, Alistair, and hello, everybody. Sorry that we had some technical problems and we're starting a little bit late. Anyhow, welcome. Thank you for introducing me, Alistair. And in fact, when I was, before I lost the connection, was looking at everyone as they were signing up, I see that there are people from all over the world, including a number of countries that I've been to. I saw Argentina, Mexico, Ukraine, Russia, Bulgaria, Pakistan, although I haven't been there, and someone from Switzerland, which is nearby where I actually am based. I live in France, I live in Paris. And it's a pretty nice afternoon here in Paris after a rainy morning. All right. So here's what I'd like to do for the next 45 or 50 minutes. If I can get the, there we go. Here's my overview, all right? What I'd like to do is talk about different teaching and learning situations, and this corresponds a lot to the scenario, one of the scenarios that you were looking at. In fact, these also correspond to my teaching background. I'm going to suggest some uses of practice materials in those situations. We'll talk about candidates' challenges. This had a relation to another of the polls that you did. We'll talk about the 4 skills, or is it 5 skills? And then we'll talk about both paper-based and or computer-based practices and tests. Okay? So that's my overview. After each one of the so-called scenarios, the teaching and learning situations, let's go back. After each one of the teaching scenarios, I'll leave a few minutes for questions and comments. I'm not sure why that keeps going back there, Alistair. Okay. All right. And then also every once in a while, I'll ask Alistair to pull up the polls, and we'll look at those. It looks like this slide wants to come up right away. Why is this doing this? Okay. There we go. I hope. All right. My title actually left ellipses at the end. It was Practice Makes What? You all know the proverb, I'm sure, that practice makes perfect. Alistair, I'm having trouble getting these slides to go. Yes, practice makes perfect. Yeah, go ahead.
These slides at the moment, Gary, but I'm trying to resolve it.
Okay. Anyhow, if you, the collocation, the proverb, or the saying, if you will, is practice makes perfect. My father taught me that, in fact, son, nothing's perfect. And he may be right. Anyhow, I think he probably is. So what we're going to try and do is how can practice for taking and, yeah, I don't know about the slides. All right. How practice can make better. All right. Technical problems. Nothing's perfect, as my dad said. All right. The slides are going one by one without me actually having any control over them. So let's try the next one. All right. So, Alistair, can we look at the poll results of this first one? Sorry. Alistair is
just downsized the slides. I'm bringing those over right now, Gary. I brought them over so you could see the slides.
I'm going to have to put on my reading glasses, as maybe some of you might also. All right. All right. Well, if we look at this, that's not the poll we were talking about, but that's okay. That's not surprising at all. Most people will be taking the paper-based exam. Well, in fact, that is a little bit surprising, but that's not the poll that we want. That's the first scenario that we're going to be looking at, but I was wondering if we could,
Sorry, Gary?
okay, go back to that first poll.
Okay. There you go.
No, this is the one about the most challenging skills.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. There we go. Okay. So let's see what the poll results are. Well, we've got speaking in first place, writing in second, followed closely by listening. Okay. Now, thank you for that. We might go back to the main slides because this is not surprising. I remember asking this question to a group in Romania. And I asked the question, what are the most difficult skills for your students? And a teacher in the front somewhat aggressively say, the productive ones, of course. I somewhat timidly said, why? And she said something which I think is quite nice, because cooking is more difficult than eating. Cooking is an action, an active action, whereas eating is a little more passive. Anyhow, if we can use that analogy, to move the slide, we're having definite difficulties with these slides. Okay. We can see here that of the four language skills, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, the productive one, something coming out, if you will, like cooking, and then the listening and reading, something going in, the input, somewhat like eating. In any case, as we know, the Cambridge exams test all four skills and include also use of English in most of the exams. Use of English, of course, being grammar and vocabulary. We'll look every once in a while, those of you who are not new to preparing for Cambridge exams or already know about these changes to Cambridge English First and First for Schools and Cambridge English Advanced. These are the three main changes, in my opinion. But we also want to talk about these five skills, because if we look at the CEFR, the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, all languages, not just English, we see that the CEFR breaks speaking down into two skills: spoken interaction and spoken production. And we'll see how the Cambridge exams do both of these also. Spoken production in the so-called long turn, and spoken interaction when they're actually interacting with the other candidate who is taking the speaking test with them, and indeed with the interlocutor. So, the five language skills. Okay? All right. Let's get into the first scenario. We've already seen the answers, Alistair, about students taking, a large majority taking the paper-based exam, 9.5 to 1. We also saw that almost all students will have access to a computer with a good internet connection. So let's look at what are the results of the scenario which corresponds to people's teaching situations, which in fact correspond to both of my teaching situations in the past. Very interesting. So it's about half and half, all right? Some are using exam preparation course books to prepare classes to take the exams. So the candidates, the students will already know about the format of the exam and things like that. Whereas a lot of you, like I was doing also, are just using general English course books and have some students, perhaps individually, perhaps two or three, preparing to take Cambridge exams. Very good. So let's look at, first of all, the first scenario. Okay? So this is the first scenario. About half of you were doing that. By the way, I'm sure some of you probably voted in that poll for both because you might be in both teaching situations like I was. Okay? So I have 4, I believe, suggestions for this scenario. You're using course books to prepare classes to take Cambridge exams, all right? But they may need practice to be better, okay? And the first suggestion is very simply, have the class take a complete mock exam as a diagnostic assessment for you and or for the students, for the candidates, all right? Since most of you will be taking the paper-based exam, here's something from a practice test first for schools. We'll talk about for schools a little more in detail later, but as I think most of you probably know, now there are for preliminary, key, and first for schools exams are aimed more at teenagers and younger learners, whereas a normal first and advanced are more for adults. Anyhow, here's something. As you can see in these practice tests, there are four tests. And the first suggestion is do a complete mock exam. If you can't take a whole morning or a whole afternoon, I guess you could do this in exam conditions by paper. But in any case, get them used to taking the exam in exam conditions by using the sample answer sheet that they'll find in the back of the book. Here's one, reading and use of English, and they'll transfer their answers to the answer sheet. Here's one for the listening, and again, simply transferring their answers in an exam situation onto the answer sheet. Okay. We won't talk a lot right now about Test Bank, which are authentic practice tests online. But if your students are going to be taking the computer-based test, or indeed if they would prefer to practice online, they can take an authentic practice test on Test Bank. And as you can see there, that is the real type of thing, an authentic practice test in online exam conditions. The second suggestion is after we've taken this mock assessment, this mock diagnostic exam, you as the teacher can look at what are the challenging papers or parts of papers. It may be the same for the whole class, or it may be the same that you might need to guide some learners to practice different parts of the papers, okay? And again, using the practice tests, I highlighted, in fact, what we chose as the 2 most challenging skills, writing and speaking. We can use, though, then, to practice, to build confidence, to improve their English, of course, at the same time, because that's what we're trying to do, is not only have them succeed at the exam, but also have them prepare for real life. Right? So the writing and the speaking. Right? This is one of the changes in Cambridge English First and Advanced and First for Schools. Writing part 1 is now an obligatory essay. All right? So they write the essay. I think writing was our first, the first vote, the winner. And we can see here that here's something they write. And what are they going to do after this? Well, they can give it to you, but why not have them exchange amongst themselves? We're in a classroom situation, so why not have them, perhaps without writing their name on it, give it to a fellow student, take an example essay from a student, and then criticize it, constructive criticism. Might just be simple corrections for spelling, this, that, or the other thing. Or it might be very good, or I like that example, or not enough words. In other words, let them help themselves. And it also will save you time from having to grade a lot of writing papers. Okay? However, in the First for Schools with answers, for if you prefer that, you do have the scale here. You do have the assessment of how writing on Cambridge exams, this is First for Schools. And you can see where we're looking for a B2 level, okay? Looking at content, communicative achievement, Organization, very important, of course, for essay writing part one, and then the language, all right? A suggestion for the teacher is in the back you will have some sample essays, okay? Some good, some sort of middling, some not so good. And why don't you try, just to sort of gauge for yourself, to read the sample essay and then to give it your own mark and maybe some commentary on the 4 parts of the scale. After you do that, if you hide that, after you do that, you can put up and see how that was assessed by Cambridge English Language Assessment. That's something to get you for the writing, okay? Speaking was our second choice for the most difficult of the 4 skills, but we talked about speaking being 2 individual skills of production and of interaction. This is how the speaking test looks. So it gives the candidate how the different parts of the speaking test are put together. You as the teacher in the with answers edition of the practice test have in the back frames for the speaking test. That lady on the left could be you, and the young man and the young woman underneath could be 2 of your students, if you have the time to give them all practice speaking tests. All right? You also will have visuals for the speaking test. On the left is the picture that will be used for the so-called long turn or production, where on the right, it's not a picture anymore as it was precedently. It is a visual, but it's trying to get them to be to be abstract rather than focusing on concrete things. In other words, to bring it up a notch, okay? Therein is the overall scores that will be given by the interlocutor who is running the interaction. And for a more complicated and precise, this is what the assessor, as you all probably know, there's an interlocutor and assessor in Cambridge speaking exams, and the assessor sits somewhere out of the interaction and is assessing in more detail. Again, at a B2 level for schools, grammar and vocabulary, discourse management, this could be on the long term, moving from point to point, pronunciation, of course, and then also in the interaction, interactive communication. In other words, not talking all the time, but asking the other person, what do you think? Reflective listening is also a part of interactive communication. All right? Then finally, the third suggestion is, well, now do a complete mock exam before they sit the real exam in exam conditions. All right? Again, using one of the tests and the sample answer sheet, so they're getting the real thing. And then there's a key. There'll be the key in back so they can check their answers if you want to give them that opportunity. You can check all the answers, which takes a lot of time. All right? All right. And you can, as far as speaking, you might want to record what they were doing. They might want to record what they're doing. And also, as we also already mentioned, is building speaking confidence to visualize the exam conditions and to have them practice. Okay? This visualization is very important. If you don't have the time to conduct all of the speaking tests, you can have them with a colleague, with a fellow student, with a classmate, do the speaking test and record themselves for you to have a look at it afterwards. I should say for you to have a listen at it afterwards. If they're using TestBank, I see some of the comments. It's a little bit disconcerting to see all of the comments and all of that in the chat box. I'm trying not to. But I did see some people asking for some information about TestBank. Well, there it is. TestBank is online, authentic online practice test that can be taken in the test mode or the practice mode. The test mode is time. The practice is, as we were saying, they can do it at their own speed and pace. But I particularly wanted to look at the speaking. Okay. Anyhow, TestBank is on the Cambridge Learning Management System. The teacher can register a class. The class will have a class code, and each individual student in the class will have an access code to join the class. They can take the full, as I've already said, they can take the full exam in practice or test mode. This is from a preliminary for schools, and I'm just going to run through these very quickly. But this is like the exam, but it's a practice, an official practice. Since it's preliminary for school, it's aimed more at teenagers. Here's something for reading. Here's something for writing that they can write in. It'll be stored on the learning management system for you to go to and to give a mark, and also if you want to give comments. Here's something from the listening. Again, you can see that the choices are for teenage after-school activities. But it's particular, oh, sorry, I'm going a little too fast. In this, on Test Bank, on the learning management system, by the way, we all know that an LMS is a system to help you and the students manage the learning. The students can look at their scores. They can compare scores across the practice mode, across the papers. Again, diagnostically to assess, take responsibility for their learning and to see where they need to practice. On the other hand, you might have to do that for them because here is the teacher's page where you have an overview of the whole class. That's sort of a nice colored bell curve. Perhaps more importantly, you have details of the students to see how they're doing, how much time they're spending, what they need to work on. So the LMS can help you by managing the learning and indeed grading, or at least marking up the parts of the exam. All right? But it's the speaking practice that I want to focus on now, because this idea of visualizing and practicing, well, it's one thing with the teacher, it's one thing with a classmate, but on Test Bank, you're actually speaking with an examiner. Okay? There's an examiner who asks the questions, just like on the real test. Students record themselves. They play it back, and then they submit for your review, teacher review, because it's stored on the learning management system. There is the examiner. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but I hope you can see that I've highlighted the loudspeaker. So you hear that, you get the instructions, and then with the microphone, hopefully working better than mine today, with the microphone, then they answer the interlocutor's question or cue or prompt, and that's recorded, and they can then leave it on the learning management system on Test Bank. Okay? So another way then to build speaking confidence, to visualize, and have students practice, because practice makes better. Okay? So there are the suggestions for scenario 1. A mock exam is a diagnostic assessment both for you and for them. Practice by paper or part of paper, the whole class or individual students. This can be by exchanging essays for the writing, part 1. It can also be by having practice speaking tests with colleagues or classmates. And then before sitting the real exam, do a final mock exam in exam conditions. Okay. Alistair, do we have time right now, and do we have any comments on scenario 1?
Hi, Gary. I don't think we have any questions at the moment, so should we carry on and save them for the end?
Okay. All right. Very good. So let's look at scenario 2. This was a situation that I was in, that a lot of you are in also. Excuse me. Using general English course books, you have students who need to prepare and want to take Cambridge English exams. Might be 2 or 3 in the class. It might be individual students. I'm not exactly sure. I had both. Okay. The first suggestion is to become familiar with the exam format and train and practice every part of each paper. All right. If they're in scenario number 1 while you're using an exam preparation course book, they already will get that in the course book of how the exam is put together, tips and all of that. Okay. But if they're independent or just a couple of them, and they say, teacher, I want to take a Cambridge English exam. How do I practice? How do I prepare? Well, first, my suggestion is that they actually find out how the exam is put together. They can do this on Test Bank in the practice mode, all right? Because in the practice mode, what happens is they can put up a hint button. If you see that yellow part above this activity, this exercise, this task item for preliminary for schools, it's reading and they have to choose which one more necessarily corresponds the best. You can see that the yellow, when they push the hint button, they have information about the exam. But I want to look more now at trainer. All right, I'm going to go to advanced trainer. This is not for schools in advanced, and as we all know, advanced is a C1 level. And I hope you can see there my yellow arrow pointing. There are 6 tests, but the first 2 tests are training and exam practice. I was talking with my colleague in the Paris office who said, Gary, remind them that the trainer is also excellent for teachers who are not that familiar with the exam. All right? So if you're a new teacher to Cambridge exams and you want to know in and out about the exams, the format, how to prepare and how to train, you might want to look at trainer. But let's focus on the student. This arrow, and I must say this is Alistair's fault and not mine, that first yellow arrow, it should be up a little more because the first test, all right, is training. Every individual part of each paper in test 1 is trained. You're working through the exam format and at the same time getting tips about that part of the exam. After that, is exam practice. And we can see here, this is giving advice on how to take that part of the exam. So in other words, every part is, I think the next one is listening. This is test 2. There's training and exam practice. And there in test 2, you get a review of this part of the paper. The first one, test 1, was information. Now it's review. And then in the exam practice, you're asked to make your own individual action plan. Okay? After they've familiarized themselves with the exam format, then just like my suggestion for scenario number 1, it's scenario number 2, they take a complete mock exam as a diagnostic assessment. Again, this may be something they'll have to do themselves, or they may come up to you and ask you for your help on it. But it's to take a full mock exam in exam conditions. In trainer, just like in the practice test, tests 3, 4, 5, and 6 are practice tests where they can, paper-based, those, and the majority is taking paper-based, can actually, again, take the test and transfer their answers onto the sample answer sheet. All right? If they're doing it on their own, then they can look up, after they do this, they can look up the answer. There you see that they have the key, okay, the answer plus an explanation of why that is the right answer. They have a model answer for the writing part. Again, I'm focusing on the essay part. And also, they have the transcripts for the test, for listening. These are available on audio CD, and also they're downloadable on MP3 files, so they can not only review the listening, but practice the listening. Must not forget that listening was number 3 on our poll just after speaking, I believe. Okay? If they're doing this online, it was already said on the on Test Bank, then they'll be taking the mock exam in exam conditions. Okay? After taking that mock exam, either with your guidance or their own diagnostic, looking at the answer and seeing where their challenges are, then they can practice these challenges by the whole paper or part of the paper. Again, on Test Bank, in the practice mode, they can practice the attempts, and there's no timing, so they can practice where they're having problems on individual parts or on whole papers. Okay? And in the advanced trainer then, again, I focused on writing and speaking. Again, similarly to the others, if those are the challenges, or if they indeed they have challenges on other parts, other skills, they can practice those challenges and prepare for taking a final exam. Okay. Here is from test 3, the writing part 1. Again, obligatory essay is now something they have to do for first and for advanced. And then in the back, they can compare, after they do their answer, they can compare their answer with a model answer. All right? In other words, to improve their writing and also to improve their mark on the exam. In the speaking, there will be the pictures necessary for the interaction. And then there will also be the visual stimuli here, somewhat similar to what we saw in First for Schools, but this one is more at an advanced level, because, at an adult level, because it's dealing with job choices, okay? So they have that prompt there. They're being tried to be more abstract, to think more abstractly. And if they're not in a class that's preparing, everyone's preparing an exam, they may be in a class where some of them are, and then they could do it with a friendly friendly classmate, and again record themselves. Or indeed, if they're doing it entirely independent, we'll find a friend who speaks English, give them the speaking frames, and practice with them. Record yourself, come back and listen to yourself to see how you're doing better. Okay? And then finally, as in scenario 1, before they sit the real exam, well, take the time to sit down and do a final complete mock exam in exam conditions. Concentrate. One of the challenges for any candidate taking an exam, a Cambridge exam or any exam, of course, is concentration, is to focus during the whole exam. You know, it's hard to be perfect, but practice makes better. Anyhow, take that. And again, if they're doing it on the test bank LMS, then they can do it in computer-based test exam conditions. Or if they're doing it with one of the trainers, again, using the sample answer sheet to transfer their answers for the paper-based exam. All right. So there, I believe, are the suggestions for scenario number 2. It's a little bit different because they need, first of all, to become familiar with the exam format and train and practice every part of each paper. Then take this full mock exam, either to diagnose for themselves or with your help. After that, to practice their individual or particular challenges, either by a whole paper or parts of the paper. And then before they sit the real exam, take a final mock exam in exam as close as they can get to exam conditions. All right. I think, Alistair, that maybe we should have taken some time for questions for scenario 1, but we do have time, or if there are any questions in scenario 2, or do you want to take all of questions and comments at the end, Alistair?
Hi, Gary. Reason we didn't take any questions for scenario 1 was because we didn't actually have any at that point. But okay. So that's why I didn't take any then. But we've got some questions coming in now. If you're happy to answer some.
Does it deal with scenario 2, or is it more general about is it more general?
They're reasonably general, I must say, actually.
Well, why don't I, if you agree, Alistair, why don't I wrap up the slides and go to the next to last slide, which is this on questions and comments, and then we can spend the remaining time on questions and comments. Does that sound like something we can do?
That sounds great.
Okay, so we'll do that. All right, so let's just review now what I was trying to do in these 40 minutes. So we'll have plenty of time for questions and comments, all right? Anyhow, to look at different teaching and learning situations, these 2 scenarios which corresponded to my teaching past, either using course books, exam preparation course books to prepare the whole class for taking an exam, or there are teaching general English and some of the students are taking the exam. I looked at suggested uses of various practice materials in those situations. We talked about candidates' challenges, and the main challenges being of the four skills, speaking and writing. But then again, individual candidates will have individual challenges to practice and prepare for, again, either by the whole paper or by parts of the paper. I tried to point out that the CEFR talks about 5 skills because in speaking, there's a skill of production, like I've been doing a lot for the last 40 minutes, but pretty soon we're going to have some interaction, maybe not spoken interaction because I won't be able to hear you, but if we ever meet, if I'm in your country, I'm not going to talk to you for 40 minutes without asking you to interact with me. And finally, we found out that almost 95, I can't remember, maybe it was 97% of your candidates will be taking the paper-based exam, a few the computer-based. However, they may be interested in practicing online with TestBank. Thank you for participating in the polls. We'll have time for comments and questions after just a couple more slides. There you have on the bottom of this slide some of the practice tests, either the black with answers or the white without answers. There are also, I saw IELTS come up, there are also for IELTS or proficiency or whatever. And then the trainers, and there is a trainer for IELTS, all right? And the trainers then more for scenario number 2. I saw there were lots of questions about TestBank. Oh, I forgot to point this out. Anyhow, here are the existing TestBank, if you can see that, and my colleague Jenny Mutlu Collins might be replying to some of you about that. I mentioned that TestBank can be purchased as I didn't actually say purchased, but I am now, can be purchased for institutions so that the teacher can set up a class and the whole class can have an access code. I forgot to mention that TestBank is also available for individuals who would prefer practicing online or indeed preparing to take the exam online. And that's it, except for the final exam. So, very good. I'm willing to take questions and comments as you wish, Alistair.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. So I must say that Jenny has been very active in the chat and has answered a lot of the very specific questions around TestBank. But we've got a question from Haroon Baig, who says, which do you think, in this context, is the best method for developing and increasing students' vocabulary in a way that enables them to retain it for a longer period?
Well, that's a very good question. Let's see, there are 2 things, okay? Let's sort of do the carrot and the stick. The stick would be if the motivation is to do well on the exam. There are vocabulary there are books published by Cambridge with focus on the vocabulary at particular levels for the particular exam. Okay. I didn't mention those, but those are vocabulary and grammar, preparing largely for the use of English part paper. However, this idea of retaining it for the long time, that might be the carrot, sort of. I'm a firm believer in extensive reading. I'm sure all of you, if you're not a native English speaker, you speak a second language. But I bet that you read things, and when you read things, you might not look up every word in the dictionary, but you're learning vocabulary in context, and I would argue retaining it. For example, my French is very good, not my pronunciation. My French is a C2 level, but I still read every other book. I like literature. Every other book, I go from French to English to French to English. Doesn't mean they have to read literature or whatever your students want to read, whether it's motorcycle magazines or sports magazines or someone's blog or whatever. That personal involvement, I think, is an excellent way to retain vocabulary. Indeed, not only for the exam, but also for life.
Yes, I agree entirely on that, Gary, that you need to sort of take advantage of the students' own interests, and actually then that's the way to get them get them to pick up the vocabulary that they'll need. And also, I guess, would you agree that if those are the subjects they're interested in, reading on those subjects is far more likely to find them the targeted vocabulary they're looking for?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, do we have any more questions for Gary? I know that Jenny's done a great job of answering specific test bank and other exam-related questions. So any more questions for Gary?
I see you got a question, Alistair. Are you coming to Switzerland to present? I'm not sure if you are, but I am in September.
Yeah, I think that must have been one for you. So, so are you? Whereabouts in Switzerland will you be?
It's the ETAS, what they call SIG Day. ETAS is the Swiss Teachers Association for English teachers. Mm-hmm. I'm sure in your other countries, those of you who are still listening, you have your national association also. And ETAS has a national conference, and then they have a SIG, a Special Interest Group Day. I'm not sure where it is. I know it's the second weekend of September, but I'm not sure where it is.
Okay, thanks. And just while you're answering that question, we've had a sudden flurry of questions coming in. An interesting one from Elizabeth Dunn, who says, do you think that the computer-based test is easier or more difficult for students, and what specific challenges does it pose?
Can you repeat that? Because I didn't hear what you said before. Easier. Does what make it easier?
Do you think the computer-based test is easier or more difficult for students, and what specific challenges does it pose?
Wow. I'm not exactly sure how to reply to that. Jenny might. I'm not sure if it. Well, you know, people used to talk about digital natives and digital immigrants. Now, of course, that's last century. Now people are talking about people who are digital residents and digital visitors. I'm a digital visitor, but my kid and maybe a lot of your younger candidates, but not necessarily only younger, are digital residents. So it might not make it easier, but it might make it more friendly. Alistair will think of a better term than friendly, user-friendly or motivating or whatever. But I don't really think it's going to make it easier. The fact that they're writing, if you go to the test bank example for practice, their writing is saved for you then to look at as the teacher, and their speaking is also recorded, so you don't have to take the time. So it might make it easier for you. I'm not exactly sure if it would make it easier for them. What do you think, Alistair or Jenny?
Jenny's mic's not on, but she can chat and type into the chat. But I think when people have been saying, particularly Abdus in the chat, that it's going to depend massively, as you were saying, on the student's own sort of digital proficiency. If, for instance, they have poor typing skills, that's more problematic for them. But we've got another few questions coming in. One interesting one from Christine Sotoro-Chandley, who asks about sort of trying to get students up to speed quite intensively right before an exam, whether you have any particular suggestions for that.
Christine, I think, who asked this, I'm not exactly sure if she was replying to get them up to speed in the scenario 1 or scenario 2. In a limited amount of time. Well, you know, research has shown, it was actually in Switzerland that I was listening to Herbert Puch to give a talk on research about not exactly studying for exams, but retaining things. And my original, I'm originally American, so in American English we say cram for an exam. How do you say that in British English, Alistair?
We have cramming too.
Okay, so cramming for an exam, as the research has shown, is not really the best thing to do. It's more to come back to things from time to time. I would say then if they do have, I'm not sure what you're talking about, Christine, in time frame, let's say a month before the final exam, well, this idea of doing a mock exam to diagnose where their problems are, and then focusing, not cramming, but focusing on those problem areas, those challenges, if you will, what I would probably do if I had to get someone up to speed in a month. If you're saying shorter than that, I'm not exactly sure.
Okay, thanks. A question from Maya Maladanova, who asks what suggestions you've got for practicing speaking, particularly assessment and feedback, because it's really difficult to assess while giving tasks in a mock speaking exam.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, that's why the Cambridge exams, they have the interlocutor, but they also have the assessor. Being both the person who is running the exam and trying to do a detailed assessment is very hard for even people who can do two things at once. That's very difficult to do that. Uh, the idea was to have your students practice, if you have the time individually to do something with them and to record a mock speaking exam. It's going to take about 15 minutes, all right, of that. Record it and listen back to it and then give them feedback. Otherwise, something that for class atmosphere, class motivation is have them give each other a mock exam, take it together, if you will, and then record it and give it to you, or indeed record it and play it back themselves. You can, and Jenny might have to correct me on this, but on the Cambridge English Assessment site and on something called speaking preparation packs, you have videos of of certain candidates taking the speaking part, and then there also the teacher, or if you want the students to do it, the candidates can judge what they think were good or bad parts about the speaking paper, to give them an idea of how they will do in comparison to the candidates that they see doing it all right, not so good, and very good.
Thanks very
Jenny
much.
might have something to say about that.
We'll see if Jenny's going to add something in the chat. Thanks. Question from Barbara Onoprechuk, who asks, how can I take advantage of the extra time my fast finisher students have when they're doing a practice test? And what would be the best way of using that?
Well, if they're taking a practice test and you want to do it in so-called exam conditions, have them check their answers, go back. They can go back either in the paper-based exam, they can go back and check their answers. On test bank before on the computer-based test and test bank, before they actually submit their answers, they can go back and all of that. So for the fast finishers, I'd say, look over your work. Maybe you're not going to be perfect, but you'll be better by looking back at your work. Okay, if that's the scenario that she's talking about. Okay.
Okay, thanks. Question now from Derek Doucette, who asks if you could say anything more about imagination and speaking preparation, as you were talking about earlier.
Well, I think what I was talking about is visualization.
Yeah.
When I was preparing candidates for FCE, as it used to be called, or First Certificate, or which is now Cambridge English First, video of watching candidates take tests or whatever didn't really exist, and this is one thing that I insisted on was at least showing them pictures and visualizing how it takes place with 2 or sometimes 3 candidates, the interlocutor across from them, and the assessor on the side or in the corner. So this visualization is important. On the other hand, visualization, as we all know, is important in a lot of fields, architecture, drawing, music, sports. I really like sports. And visualization is something that's coming in. So this idea of closing their eyes, of visualizing, maybe in the bathtub, that's where I do it, sorry about that. But I visualize in the bathtub, closing my eyes and imagining giving a presentation, or they could speaking test, or just a quiet place where they visualize themselves successfully doing the speaking test, or successfully doing a good backhand, which I'm still trying to do in tennis.
Okay, thank you. Okay, just looking at which other questions we've got. It's a question from Haroon Baig about the key points in assessing the writing task, the rubric for that. Do you have anything to say on that subject?
What I pointed out was in the In the back of the books, there will be this a scale for how the writing is assessed. That's also available, and I do believe in more detail. Again, Jenny, you might have to correct me on that. On the Cambridge English, the assessment site, in more detail of those different. I can't even remember. Let me get this up. Of those four things like that. Okay, the language, the communicative achievement. I can't read my others, the content, and whatever. So either if you have one of the practice books for the trainers, or just go to the Cambridge English site, and then you'll get a detailed rendering of that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Gary. Okay, unless we've got any more questions coming in, I think we've got one that's best for Jenny to deal with. I think we'll wrap up there. So thank you very much, Gary. Thanks for.
Can I go to my last slide, right, and then leave it to you? My last slide is just to say thank you all for listening and participating. Good luck in either of the scenarios, or good luck. And that was preparing to take Cambridge English exams. Practice makes better. Thank you very much, and over to you, Alistair.
Thanks, Gary. So thank you for sailing on despite the technical difficulties there. And don't forget, everyone, that we'll be back next week with Lynn Durrant, who will be talking about integrating phonics into the very young learner's classroom. The week after that, Deirdre Safers and Gordon Lewis will be back talking about supporting students on online courses. And then on Wednesday, May the 27th, Karen Elliott will be joining us to talk about phonics fun and games for infants and primary. So I do hope you can join us and sign up for those. My colleague Lucia will be putting the relevant details so you can sign up for those into the chat right now. So thank you very much for joining us. Just to remind everybody that, as always, you don't need to email us to ask for a certificate. Certificates will be sent out automatically in the next few days. So please don't email us to ask for a certificate. Those will be sent out automatically. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll hopefully see you again in a week's time. Thank you.